At the stroke of midnight on October the 4th, or day 1 of the entire nationwide invasion within the South Central Invasion Sector, which was comprised predominantly of Texas but also Oklahoma and New Mexico, this critical invasion sector was the scene of many enormous battles within the scope of the larger nationwide invasion. And one such campaign, which was itself an enormous undertaking, like many of the others, was the battle over the Dallas-Fort Worth area metroplex, an enormous road, rail, and air hub, and one that the PLA had highly coveted for their future colonial projects within the soon-to-be-conquered land. However, at this point in time, early in the invasion, there was enormous amounts of work that needed to be done insofar as the invasion forces vis-a-vis the American defenders were concerned, as the active duty 83rd Air Asslt Brigade of the PLA's 83rd Group Army, much of which fighting a separate massive battle within the Houston area metroplex, had attached this very capable and quasi-elite Air Asslt Brigade to the large reserve PLA 59th Group Army, a relatively sizable group army when considering that standard PLA group armies were between 50 and 55,000. This PLA group army hosted a personnel count of 64,000 total troops, as many of the active duty and some reserve group armies had gone through the second phase of reorganization to where they now had combined arms brigades. The 59th had only gone through the initial reorganization phase like many reserve PLA group armies, and still even had division-sized forces like the 16th ID, as the rest of their forces were primarily brigades. They were not combined arms brigades in the sense of what the active duty PLA forces were, but these were very specialized units nonetheless, and were well organized and were an outstanding choice of a group army for the massive task, which was the subjugation of the DFW metro area, which boasted a population of just over 8 million total inhabitants, and it had a treasure trove of spread out civil industries, as well as some of America's small military-industrial base, having many corporate offices and some important manufacturing facilities within this massive metropolitan area. As the infrastructure, primarily the air and road infrastructure, with the rail being a secondary priority, at least for the time being, the control of I-35, both I-35W and also I-35E, which ran through the city of Dallas, which itself was the largest of all the amalgamation of different cities in this particular metropolitan area, had to be brought under total PLA control, as these were the key invasion routes that would be utilized by the external invasion forces, primarily group armies 7 through 13, as they would effectively transit through this area and would be stopping to effectively logistically resupply along their journey, as the 59th Support Brigade, the chief logistical force within the larger 59th Group Army, would effectively be manning the logistical stations along I-35W, as in Gainesville, for the forces that would relieve congestion by taking I-35E, there would be another effective Trojan logistical force to the north that would handle the care of those groups taking I-35E, although those taking I-35W through Fort Worth would be effectively resupplied by the 59th at their CCP regime highway side properties, which effectively were like the invasion army's massive gas station of sorts, as well as also resupplying them with any expended ammunition should they have had to have used any en route on their massive elongated convoy formations, which stretched for many miles as they crossed the border and got onto I-35 to their long travel deep into the heart of the United States. As in the North, the different forces on their CCP regime properties were now tackling some of the largest objectives in the area, chiefly the 24th Light Infantry Brigade, the 35th Armored Brigade, with its forces tasked with the international airport, and sending one of its armored to even assault in a joint assault with forces from the 24th against the Naval Air Station in the white settlement outer suburb of Fort Worth, and then pursuing fleeing American combat companies that had escaped the battle and would flee along I-820 to the south, which would come a bit later on the first day. The initial combat was already underway in various flank clear operations. Massive artillery fire, massive the 59th Group R, as they had their single battalion of the PHL-03 300mm multiple launch rocket systems. These were enormously destructive and powerful weapons, and effectively were the most powerful of the artillery weaponry in use by the PLA 59th Group Army. As this were their two additional rocket battalions of the Type 83 multiple launch rocket systems, as these were 122mm multiple launch rocket artillery platforms, which comprised two battalions, as the Type 83 was effectively an upgrade of the original PHL-81 family, and these equipped their 122mm battalions, as they had two of these within the 19th. They also had 4 howitzer battalions of towed howitzers, 2 battalions of the widely mass-produced PLL-66. There were literal of the door softball brought equipped brand new artillery forces, and also widely for this was being cranked out in large. Well, PLL-115 howitzers, which equipped 2 4 howitzer battalions within the 19th Artillery Brigade. Of course, they had their headquarters and support company, which were the command and logistics over the 19th Brigade. The very firing batteries of all of the 19th Artillery Brigade's battalions, as these batteries were effectively companies in artillery terms that comprised these battalions, had massive fire missions and calls for fire to support troops in the field, as these artillery troops would effectively get the proverbial workout of their life, having to haul shells from their supply vehicles to their gun lines, as the pallets of shells would be dropped off in massive numbers for the enormity of the fire missions ahead, as they brought them out of their hidden logistical stores on their CCP regime properties, which went for not only their howitzer forces, but their rocket artillery forces as well within the 19th Artillery Brigade. These artillery forces would shower and blanket the city in an enormous torrent of demolishing explosive power. As not only was there the chief artillery component within the 59th PLA Group Army, but their maneuver brigades also had their own artillery, including the 35th Armored Brigade with its own battalion of the PLZ-05 self-propelled howitzers, the 24th Light Infantry Brigade with their own highly mobile PCL-181 truck-based mobile howitzers, which were 155mm as well, and of course, the 16th Infantry Division, also equipped with the PLZ-05 self-propelled 155mm howitzers, just as were the 35th Armored Brigade's Artillery Battalion. All of this firepower was simply gargantuan in terms of scale, and adding to it the crippling air power from strategic air raids from the extremely heavy-hitting H-6K heavy strategic bombers, but the vastly more destructive brand new H-20 heavy stealth bombers as well, as two of these from the H-20 bomber squadron in the northeast of Texas, alongside of the local bomber squadron of H-6Ks, had effectively broken up their squadrons to move into different areas to hit different targets that were critical to any potential for an American war effort, as the fourth generation warfare doctrines did not really allow or permit for any response that was coordinated from the American side, as the total communications and ISR down prevented any real actionable intel from reaching the Americans, and thus making them able to coordinate effective defenses over a wide area, as well as the lack of communications adding to this hindrance, as they were effectively thrown back into the Stone Age by the combination of anti-satellite strikes, the massive cyber attacks from the well-funded and enormous PLA cyber warfare arm, not to mention their Russian allies joining in as well in this, as well as also the anti-sat strikes, as also the local electronic warfare assets, primarily Chinese and Russian, also did a massive crippling job when it came to removing redundant communications and ISR capabilities, such as multi-mission radars or portable air defense radars that were not dependent upon satellite or internet for their functioning. As all of this effectively completely left the Americans blind and unable to respond effectively, the massive air, missile, and artillery strikes were far too much to contend with. However, there would still be plenty of fighting ahead, as not only would the military forces be under siege as it pertained to the local American defending forces, primarily 6th Infantry Brigade combat team of the National Guard, which was a component of the larger 36th Infantry Division of the Texas National Guard, as well as two additional battalions attached to and under the command of the 56th Infantry Brigade combat team, similar to how the 83rd Air Asslt Brigade was put under the command of the 59th Group Army and attached to them for the duration of the Dallas-Fort Worth area combat operation. As the Armored Battalion in the area, the 2nd of the 198th, coming from the 155th Armored Brigade combat team, but effectively attached to the 56th Infantry Brigade combat team for this defensive operation, and the 1st of the 204th, the SHORAD Battalion of Avenger Stinger-based air defense systems, as these were Humvee Stinger missile-equipped systems with their radars and their ability to provide low-altitude force protection from air threats. However, due to their multi-mission and air defense radars being effectively jammed, a massive SEAD operation was occurring at the opening of the invasion against this entire battalion, as its Alpha Company was actually on the Naval Air Station to defend it, while the rest of its elements were in the parking area of the large Lockheed Martin factory to partially defend that as well, as none of their forces would be effective in this instance. They were heavily carpet munitioned and hit by missile and artillery strikes, as an H-6K had flown overhead and completely flattened their positions alongside of tactical ballistic missile, cruise missile, and even hypersonic missile strikes from DFCF glide warheads coming in from DF-17 hypersonic missiles, as also the DF-100 hypersonic cruise missiles would be used, and even the miniature short-range artillery-based tactical ballistic missiles had been used against the Naval Air Station, known as the BRE-8s, being fired from the longest-range artillery system in the world, which was the A300 or PHL-16, or sometimes even called the AR-3, as these were hitting heavily the Naval Air Station. All of this firepower was, again, simply far too much to bear, and as different objectives took different amounts of time to capture based on whether the objective was to be destroyed or captured intact, determined often the length of these battles. As the Naval Air Station was to be completely annihilated, it was effectively a free fire zone with enormous amounts of munitions being dropped and fired upon it by ground, air, and missile-based systems from both the 616th Strategic Missile Forces Brigade as a Trojan unit in eastern Texas, as well as also the 612th and 613th, also belonging to the PLA's Eastern Theater Command, which were across the border in Mexico, and the 612th and 613th were heavily reinforced by called-up reserve battalions to enable them to fire more systems at a single time than they would have if it was just their active duty battalions comprising these brigades alone. In the south of the Dallas-Fort Worth area map, the 16th Infantry Division was effectively tasked with assisting in securing I-35W, as well as also controlling entry and exits to the Fort Worth side from the south, as well as also effectively conducting flank clearance operations in Arlington, Grand Prairie, and sending one of its two armored battalions, as this was an infantry division comprised primarily of its infantry forces in each of their two brigades making this division. Each brigade had its own armored battalion, and these comprised of the highly capable Type 88C main battle tanks were thrown into action on a flank clearance operation as they moved into Dallas directly, as two also of their mechanized infantry battalions on the outermost flanks by I-35W, and a third clearing the flanks at the base of the map here in the south, would control the south of Dallas while their armored battalion moved in, cooperating with an Air Asslt Bde for also one battalion would be effectively flying in to drop off forces in the downtown of Dallas, just as was being done in Fort Worth. However, the Dallas operation would be a little bit different, as in the Fort Worth area, they were all being off and would fan out and press towards the Trinity River to clear the entire downtown intact as a red zone. In the Dallas area, they would be doing landings in a diamond shape, mostly based on certain objectives, and because they needed to control the entry point for the armored forces who were to arrive into the area. Thus, they would land forces first on the west side of the Trinity River to control that area, as this was a major highway junction in this part of Dallas, this downtown area. And then they would land another company of Air Assault troops of their 4 Air Assault Infantry companies in the north by the Clyde Warren Park. They would also land another Air Assault company to the south of downtown and take the City Hall and the main police station on the Lamar Street. And then they would land their 4th and final Air Assault Infantry Battalion on the eastern side of the downtown area to assist the Armored Battalion in their assault, as they would surround, guided by the real-time AI battlefield data processing system through the ubiquitous surveillance apparatus, which could see all the American positions and guide the armored forces to surround them, where the Americans would not even know they were being surrounded, as the air assault troops would be cooperating closely with the armored forces. And then finally, the mortar company, which was the ground-based fire support company of the Air Assault Battalion, would be brought in last after the 4 Air Assault Infantry companies had captured their respective portions of downtown Dallas. They would be supported all the way by their combat aviation company of their very potent Z-10 attack helo gunships, as well as loitering munitions from the local ground-based units from all of the different forces within the 16th Infantry Division, including the Armored Battalion heading in their direction that would be assisting them, as well as other forces, as again, there were 2 battalions seeking to complete of the was letting entry south into a metroplex as they would surround and clear the flanks along the highway, as the highway needed to be secured throughout its entire duration through the city to make it as simple and easy as possible for the external invasion forces upon arrival to easily through this massive, gigantic urban area. As again, controlling the highways and ensuring that either side of them was clear was absolutely paramount so that the external components would not have to break up their convoy formation, leave the highway, engage forces, which would waste time completely, and then having to get back on and continue their convoy. That was the job of the Trojans, to clear the invasion routes through the key nodes, which were major to small urban areas, and even in some cases large towns that were along highways that had sufficient resistance contained therein. However, the big cities were the most critical to control because of their landmass, the size of population, which could contribute to the size of local resistance, also based upon local American military and paramilitary assets deployed to these different areas, including like so with the 56th Infantry Brigade Combat Team and its 2 additional attached battalions, the Armored 2nd of the 190 and the Red 1st Guards, 6th Troop Command of the Mississippi Guard, and the 155th Armored Brigade Combat Team, like the 56th Infantry Brigade Combat Team, were both components of the 36th ID. But this single battalion was sent in to defend this side of the Metroplex and posed a direct threat to the highway invasion route, which was I-35E that ran through this side of the Metroplex. And thus, all these battalions of the 16th ID would seek, along with the highly mobile and rapid-moving Air Asslt forces, to control this critical area, which also was to become a red zone as well. So damage to the downtown of Dallas was to be mitigated at all costs, although the areas immediately surrounding would be hit heavily by especially rocket artillery, but also howitzer artillery as well. As these 3 battalions, once again, the PHL-03 battalion, a PLL-66 battalion, and a PLL-01 battalion would be firing enormous fire missions into this area in complete support of the 16th ID forces moving into Dallas, as well as also the Air Asslt troops moving into Dallas as well, of the single battalion tasked with seizing critical areas of downtown, making a way for the Armored Battalion to pass seamlessly through to surround the American armored forces of the 2nd of the 198th in this particular battle. Combat engineers of the 40th Combat Engineer Brigade were likewise playing a major role on this side of the Metroplex, as they too would seize I-45, as well as control Rockwall and clearing flanks on the general eastern side of Dallas, along with mechanized infantry forces of the 16th ID. Also, these forces would be backed up by their own self-propelled PLZ-05 artillery fire, which would land on the home of Charlie Company, which was the Taylor Army heliport, and also hit armed reactionary civilians mustering and assembling as they were coming together to be able to communicate, because they had to communicate close together through line of sight or runners or earshot communications. They made easy targets for the artillery fire coming from the 16th ID's artillery battalion of the PLZ-05 155 howitzers, which also would fire into the south of Dallas in the Oak Cliff area in South Dallas to support their mechanized infantry forces, one of which would continue all the way into Garland through Terrell to begin to clear that area and surround the isolated 2nd of the 142nd, who was bivouacked in an industrial area in Garland and would also be carpet munitioned out of existence, as 2 of the 3 H6Ks would pass directly over this unit and effectively carpet munition their entire segment of the city into abject complete ruination. the unit along with it, as these heavy strategic bombers would be used in a tactical manner, similar to how they were utilized in the SHORAD operation against the 1st of the 204th, the Avenger Battalion, effectively, the short-range Stinger-based air defense battalion. As these forces of the Air Asslt Battalion would be the first in, again naturally due to their high mobility through their rotary aircraft, their transport helicopter company within the Air Asslt Battalion with their Z-20 utility helos would bring in the 1st Air Asslt Infantry Company and drop them on the western side of the Trinity River within the Trinity Greenbelt Park, which was a massive and relatively wide floodplain / park area wherein the Trinity River flowed between West Dallas, Oak Cliff, and South Dallas, separating South Dallas from Oak Cliff, as well as also downtown Dallas from West Dallas and Oak Cliff as well, as Oak Cliff and West Dallas were naturally to the southwest and west of the downtown area, respectively. I-30 ran directly through this side of the city, and control of it as, again, the major highway junction just on the other side in downtown Dallas itself, on the other side of the Trinity, was highly important to the PLA troops. As in this particular image, loitering munitions having had been fired from the different ground-based combat forces of the various mechanized infantry, combat engineer, and armored forces especially were supporting actively these Air Asslt Infantry troops, who also had massive support from their attack helo gunships that effectively traveled with the Combat Aviation Company with their Z-20 utility helos that dropped off these troops on their landing zone. As the gunships and loitering munitions cleared the landing zones, the troops, again, would be dropped in a diamond formation throughout the city to begin to control their landing zone areas and keep the downtown under firm control, making a way for the Armored Battalion to seamlessly move in, surround the American Armored Forces, and eradicate them, while keeping the city as much intact as possible. Again, this was highly important to the PLA. They needed to establish a red zone in downtown Dallas, every bit like they were trying to do in Fort Worth, which meant that this operation, as an entire operation, would take a number of hours. This would take approximately 4 hours to achieve, even with all these forces, because downtown Dallas was a large and well-built-up downtown area with a lot of high-rises, and it was a very densely populated area, and it would need to be thoroughly cleared out by the PLA Air Asslt troops, as well as the armored forces moving in to back them up and surround the Americans, as the gunships would play a massive role in supporting the armor and their own troops of the Air Asslt Infantry companies that were being landed in a diamond shape from the west, the north, the south, and the east of the downtown. These forces, again, would hold open a way for the armor to completely surround the 2nd of the 198th, the American Armored Battalion, and a relatively sizable armored battle would ensue, wherein the armored forces of the Americans would clash with the armored forces of the PLA of their battalion from the 16th ID, from their armored battalion committed into this particular area. This was the highway spur tunnel that was literally right underneath Clyde Warren Park in the north of the downtown. This effectively was the outer northern boundary of downtown Dallas, and beyond this area was Uptown. It was actually called that. It was an uptown area just outside of the downtown that was called Uptown. It was just north of Clyde Warren Park. An armored battle would occur in the tunnel area and above in Clyde Warren Park, as American armor and PLA armor would both take highway exit ramps and engage one another in the area, because the Americans, having lost all communications, were sending out one of their tank companies as a reconnaissance force to try to figure out what the hell was actually going on in the area, as the rest of their battalion had been bivouacked by the Deep Ellum East downtown Dallas area, where armored fighting would occur in this area as well, as PLA Type 88C main battle tanks and American M1 Abrams tanks would clash with the PLA supporting their armor, not only with attack helo gunships from the Air Asslt Forces, but loitering munitions fired by the Armored Battalion's headquarters and support company with heat warheads to destroy the Abrams tanks, in addition to the very powerful ammunition combinations with the very potent 125mm main gun on the Type 88Cs, with their state-of-the-art ballistic computers, image intensifiers, and, of course, weapon stabilization and fire control systems. These tanks were exceedingly formidable main battle tanks, although they were not as good as the Type 96Bs or Type 99As. These were effectively China's third best main battle tank that equipped many of their reserve forces armored units, apart from the massively mass-produced Type 96Bs, like those that equipped the entire 35th Armored Brigade of the 59th Group Army, who were now committed to battles against the DFW International Airport, as well as clearing flanks of armed reactionary civilians in the far north of the Metroplex, and destroying American forces at the Naval Air Station, as they had a cavalry battalion in the area, which itself had a tank company of M1 Abrams, but the rest of their forces were rifle companies, effectively specializing in reconnaissance and target acquisition. But these would be rapidly destroyed by the combination of fires from the main battle tanks, loitering munitions, HJ-10, ATGM fires from the anti-tank companies within the Armored Battalion, as well as also airstrikes and missile strikes from the strategic missile forces and artillery, as all of this firepower would be immense and hurriedly rip to shreds the American forces in the downtown Dallas area. On the edge of downtown on the easternmost side, PLA armored infantry troops and PLA tank companies of the attacking Armored Battalion would be fighting in this area against the American Armored Battalion forces. Again, Clyde Warren Park and the highway tunnel beneath it would become a battlefield, as well as a PLA tank company was directed to head off the American reconnaissance effort, as the Americans had sent one of their tank companies to recon the area, and the real-time AI battlefield data processing system of the PLA advised the command elements of this, and the commanders were highly flexible in their response and sent one of their own tank companies to deal with the Americans. As PLA forces, both Air Asslt and armored infantry would clear areas of the downtown like so, as on either side of this image, line formations of PLA Air Asslt infantry troops are clearing building to building, as these two NCOs had stopped to talk to one another. One NCO, a platoon sergeant of this armored infantry platoon, and this a platoon sergeant of the Air Asslt Infantry Forces, now moving in to clear all the buildings in this particular area, street by street, building by building, block by block, as the Armored Infantry Forces would continue on ahead to engage in battle the American forces of their Armored Battalion, the 2nd of the 198th. So this would result in a relatively sizable armored battle within a very small area in downtown Dallas. The downtown of Dallas would be the scene of armored graveyards, as this image here depicts some of the fighting in the Clyde Warren Park, as the Type 88Cs of the Chinese intercepting tank company are moving into the area and firing at American tanks on the other side of the Clyde Warren Park, about over a kilometer away, as loitering munitions like CH-901As with heat warheads were also entering to support their armor on the ground in this fighting. So they had their quadcopter assets reconning and mapping the entire areas in real time. The Air Asslt troops, who would land on top of the large high-rise buildings and the Dallas Police Headquarters and City Hall would effectively clear these buildings diligently in various combat formations, tactical formations, small unit tactical formations. Typically, squads would break into two half squads, with one half squad on one side of the highway, another on the other side. There would have been another half squad coming up as they were clearing rooms on this side, coming out of this room to then clear this room, while this squad was moving down the hallway and making for the staircase, as this was the stairwell that led up into a more wide office area. The tactics for room clearance could change based on, again, the size of the areas being cleared, such as a large, massive open office space like this, requiring the stack team to adjust their tactics. In smaller rooms, each of the four men would run in firing and take a corner and yell clear, while the fifth man would stay and watch their 6 o'clock outside in the hall. And then they would all rejoin and continue on to the next room. But in a wide area like this, they were adjusting their tactics by the first man yelling large room, so then the second man runs in with him and they both lay down fire so that the next two can come and lay down fire, and then they can bound and cover together through the large office space area. After first having tossed a hand grenade in, which effectively blew the desks to pieces and threw them in different parts of this office and blasted out the windows, the glass, the shrapnel from the hand grenade cut up some of the concrete wall here and made marks on it from the shrapnel, and then they sent in their troops to begin clearing the room. And as these two unlucky local PD forces effectively took a hand grenade from these Chinese troops, they, like the desks, had been thrown slightly across the room and were effectively ripped to shreds by the shrapnel. As in this downstairs image, again, squads are moving down the hall. Another half squad about to come out of this room, clear this room, while this squad is on this side, clearing this side of the hallway tactically, going room by room, now finally making for the staircase, as this is made invisible in order to see through this side of the wall what happened in here with these troops moving through the area. As these stairs continue up and they also continue down, these multi-floor buildings, which could even be standard office buildings, were all cleared in the same manner. As soon as the troops got onto the roof, they would either take the stairs or they could repel. They were very good with repelling, as they could effectively repel from the top floor and kick in the windows below, or basically fire at them to shatter the glass. They could get into buildings any number of ways, as there were multiple different ways to breach a building, as these troops could take the stair access from the roof access, and they were supported again by their CH-901A loitering munitions and their attack helo gunships, their Z-10s, which were again very potent and capable attack helo gunships, as this flying platoon of the Transport Aviation Company were bringing in their squads, and effectively they were forming a diamond formation as they effectively were inserted onto this high-rise. Over here is the Shard building in downtown Dallas, and the one that was effectively right beside it, the tall, glassy building, and there were other buildings in the area. One building had effectively been already seized, and the CCP party flag with the sickle and hammer and the Chinese national flag had been raised over it, so these troops were effectively taking control of landing zones so that they could then begin to secure portions of the downtown area intact as a red zone for the future colonization post-victory in the invasion. So again, they would go through all of the buildings in this manner, adapting their tactical formations accordingly, and effectively would take control and also make a way for the armored forces who were moving in with the air assault troops who got there first to seize control of the area, seize these objectives. As the air power would mostly be conducting the combat air patrol operations from the fighter aircraft. The J-10 squadron and the J-11 squadron would have aircraft just standard. So strike for support from the H-7 squadron, as 4 had been dedicated to the international airport at the opening of the battle, and another 4 dedicated to the naval air station, leaving 4 more left to effectively assist in other operations with strike missions. As sometimes the fighter aircraft could assist in limited ways, as they were mostly armed with air-to-air missiles at this time, but they did carry 2 laser-guided 1,000-pound air-to-ground munitions per fighter, except for the 1 pair of J-11s and 1 pair of J-10s that had been given, instead of air-to-air weapons, extra 1,000-pounders, 2 extras. So they would have 4 1,000-pounders for airstrikes in the airport capture operation for the DFW International Airport, with the rest of their weapons aboard being air-to-air, as they had multiple weapons racks effectively for their different armaments. They were mostly at this time on their first sortie armed with air-to-air munitions, with a number of air-to-ground for emergency situations. They needed close air support for beleaguered ground troops if they ever came into such difficult situations where it was required. But for the most part, the very heavy-hitting and very heavily armed JH-7s could cover most of the close air support needs of the troops on the ground. As the gradually taken bit by bit as the troops moved through the area, most of the forces in the downtown Dallas area would be lightly armed reactionary civilian elements mixed together with the far more heavily armed 2nd of the 198th, the Armored Bttn of the American forces. However, again, due to the communications down, the American forces were in a severe disadvantage, also having lost their ISR capabilities, not even fully understanding that they were being surrounded early in the battle and would be destroyed as a result, even as they sent out one of their tank companies to effectively recon the area around the Clyde Warren Park and its tunnel beneath to see what was going on throughout the rest of the city, where they had been intercepted by a PLA tank company, which effectively not only seized control of the Clyde Warren Park and tunnel area, which was the northern boundaries of downtown, but also destroyed this American tank company of M1 Abrams tanks. In the eastern transit area side of downtown, incoming American armor coming from their bivouac sites in this side of the downtown would engage, again, in a sizable armored battle on this particular corner of the downtown, in the east side of downtown, where it meets up with the area of Dallas known as Deep Ellum, where these forces had been bivouacked on large parking areas requisitioned for use by the federal and state regimes for their National Guard troops to set up their tents and logistical areas. Also local hotels on this side of the city as well. One would be hit by tactical ballistic missile strikes during this particular part of the Dallas-Fort Worth area battle. Again, major stake mitigate the damage to downtown. There were occasions where certain buildings were sanctioned to be hit heavily by artillery and or missile or airstrikes in this battle. But for the most part, the downtown of Dallas would be largely taken, mostly intact, by the Air Asslt and Armored Forces from the 16th Infantry Division's committed Armored Battalion operating in this particular area. As this image represents a side of the eastern portion, or the eastern edge of downtown, whereby the State Highway 75, which also becomes I-45, runs through the area like so. And American tanks and Bradleys and APCs, like these M113s, are completely annihilated in this area. The Air Asslt Infantry Company, dropped off on the eastern side, would also assist in fighting the American armor alongside of their Armored Battalion compatriots from the 16th Infantry Division. As these troops are fighting in an alleyway, they're fighting in the rubble of a destroyed building with its blue paint job still on the interior, with the M1 Abrams tanks traversing the rubble on the other side of this alleyway, moving towards their position, but are being fired at angle by Type 69 rocket-propelled grenade, which effectively was aimed at the top to cause shrapnel effect against the gunners on the turret, which had the M250 Cal and a 240 Bravo, which was a 7.62 by 51 NATO. And of course, armed reactionary civilians and other troops are still in the area fighting as well. And this main battle tank had already been destroyed by an ATGM, like this HJ-08 being fired at this Abrams, as the gunners are focused on threats in other directions. There's also loitering munitions, which were AI target-seeking mode guided, and their ISR capabilities linked in with the AI systems that guided the loitering munitions and advised the troops on their best courses of action, as well as also steady updates on friendly and enemy positions based on the ISR data sorted and collected and analyzed in literal split seconds by the AI system in milliseconds, and returning updates by the literal second as the data was being crunched and calculated. As the combat in this side of the downtown and in the north of it would be exceedingly harsh and heavy between the Air Asslt and armored forces of the PLA vis-a-vis the defending American armored forces and armed reactionary civilians. On the western side of downtown, key administrative buildings in the city would effectively be overrun and taken by the Air Asslt troops, as well as seeking to control the section of interstate by which the armored forces would soon be arriving from the 16th Infantry Division's Committed Armored Battalion. As this squad NCO is monitoring his PDA form of his combat data link, which also controls their squad level reconnaissance asset, he is watching all the positions of friendly and enemy troops and yelling orders to his men through their radio, as they had their radio headsets and their helmets accordingly, as they could communicate inter-squad through their headsets, and was ordering his troops on where to fire at, where the threats were appearing, and where to fire at, and what to fire, and so on and so forth, as armed reactionary civilians on the western side of the downtown area were what effectively at first were being engaged by the PLA troops as they began to arrive by air with their transport helicopter company within the Air Asslt Battalion, dropping off the first Air Asslt company in the area before returning to pick up the next, and then the next, and then the final Air Asslt Infantry Company, sending them into the east, forming a diamond in the downtown area, with the mortar company being brought into the then secured downtown to be able to set up mortar positions to assist their own troops, as well as the armored forces gradually moving through the downtown area and beyond, as again some of the comprising companies of the Armored Battalion, namely 2 tank companies and 1 armored company, would be they that would swing around the and surround them and box them to the eastern downtown Dallas area and the westernmost end of Deep Ellum, which connected to the downtown of Dallas. And here, rocket artillery and howitzer artillery fire would be utilized on the very edges of the downtown, as well as also a large armored battle featuring HJ-10 fire from the anti-tank companies, as well as loitering munition strikes, which were equipped with their heat warheads to destroy heavy armor like the Abrams tanks and Bradley IFVs used by the Americans. As again, the fire in this particular portion of the battle would be excessive and very heavy, but it would be all very well coordinated to ensure that the downtown was not outright completely annihilated. As the first landings again would occur just on the western side of the Trinity River area, they would move in and secure the county jail and courts, the city hall, and the police headquarters on Lamar Street. There is also an Amtrak station, the convention center, and more in the western side or west end of the downtown of Dallas. Dealey Plaza, which was right here, and more. All of these were the local train tracks, as the mauve color coding indicates it's passenger rail, while the brown indicates freight rail. This was all passenger rail. As downtown Dallas, the Air Assault troops were dropped off in a diamond shape and would assist as the armor would surround the American Armored Battalion and engage them in armored combat, which included in the north the American reconnaissance effort into the Clyde Warren Park from their positions in the Deep Ellum East downtown Dallas area, as the PLA armored forces were just beginning to arrive, as the last two companies of Air Assault Infantry were being brought in at the time. As the fighting in the eastern side of downtown, where it meets Deep Ellum, would be very heavy, there would be an enormous armored battle in this very tiny corner of downtown Dallas. All in all, the entire downtown battle would be relatively large.